Are we ready? All right. Welcome aboard. This is going to be a hot show.
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about right now. As a matter of fact, we were talking ahead of time here, and we were decided, we better be getting this down because people are going to be wanting to hear what our conversation is about.
Right.
So welcome to the Salt and Light Podcast. Continue to send in all your requests. Do we have any new requests at all? Any
Not
questions?
that I've seen, no.
Nope. All right.
But we were talking about
okay.
Timothy Chalamet.
Timothy Chalamet.
Because I think he won an Oscar recently. And he's like all over the internet and everyone loves him. And he's kind of a younger guy.
I don't know if he won the Oscar.
He didn't? I thought he won an Oscar.
Who won Best Actor? Isaac?
I thought
Should be able to throw these
I have
things
no
up on your
idea,
screen
but
right
I can
away.
look it
I
up.
think he won one for his
He had an
role in Dune.
acceptance speech.
Dune? Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. I guess I
think.
saw him on Dune. You know, I started to watch Dune, and I had a hard time. It's
not for me.
I couldn't even finish it. And some folks were saying just this is the greatest thing since sliced bread.
Well, there's a lot of I saw like a sketch comedy thing about a friend having like a absurd reaction to his friend not liking Dune.
Yeah.
Because it's almost like such a hardcore following of Dune that if
Yeah.
you say you don't like Dune, it's like you'll upset people.
It's so polarizing.
Yeah.
I tried watching it on an airplane and I fell asleep.
Yeah.
And usually I stay awake when I'm watching airplane movies, but Dune just didn't do it for me.
They didn't do anything to capture me in the first 30 minutes.
It's so slow and it's very long. I think the second one's like 2 hours and 45 minutes or something like that. And if it's not Lord of the Rings, I'm not watching it for 3 hours. That's for sure.
And that's an interesting thing too, because my wife succumbed to watching Lord of the Rings just recently. And
What did she think?
she wasn't into it that much.
Does that disappoint you?
No, she went through it though. We did go through all 3 extended versions though.
Oh, the
Wow.
extended versions.
That's love. That's love
But
right
we,
there.
we split them up a little bit.
Yeah.
Because it was there. But yeah, people have their own things.
The
But yeah.
extended versions are like 3 hours and like 30 minutes or something like that.
Yeah, close to 4. Some of them, yeah.
Yeah, I think so. That's an interesting point. In general, Jordan listens to the podcast, so I know she'll hear this. Jordan is so kind that she will often like recommend watching a movie that I know that she's not interested in.
Yeah. Oh,
she
wow.
thinks that I'll like it, so she wants to watch it for my sake.
That's
But I don't know how
love.
it is, but I don't
Yeah.
know how I feel about that because I feel bad. I'm
Yeah.
like, I know you're not going to like it. And then she does such a good job of still trying to like make me feel good that afterwards she'll be like, no, it was pretty good. I'm like, I don't think you really thought it was pretty good. And she'd be like, no, it was good. And I'm like, it's okay. You could just say you didn't
It's like she's
it.
trying to enjoy a flavor of ice cream that's not her flavor at
Yeah.
all. She's like,
She's
it's
being
nice.
and not even
She
telling you
is.
that though.
She's very kind.
That is a challenge that you bring up though. Looking for a movie that you know both of you will like. Sometimes
It's hard.
Yeah.
That is like the art of marriage. I think they should make a book into that.
Yeah.
Like, this is how you find a movie that you can both agree on. Because I feel like sometimes we run out of time in our evenings just scrolling around
Yeah, it
trying
takes
to
a long
find
time,
a
yeah.
show or a movie that we can watch.
Well, I have certainly like a very, very nerdy part of me, like interest wise. And so I think I know that there's categories of movies or movies that are just like completely out of the norm of what I would expect anybody really to be into that I would like, that I know I would like, but I would never ask somebody else to watch.
Are you trying
it.
to say you're a nerd? Is that what you're
Yeah, I think so.
Can I have an example of
Yeah,
a nerd
now I
movie?
need to know.
What would be a good example?
Jake's like, dang it.
I might have to come back to it because I'm trying to think of like a good.
You don't
one
need to
off
be
the top of my
ashamed.
head.
You can just share.
Maybe
with your-
okay. Here's like a good example.
It's
Like
not gonna-
I really
nobody's
liked.
gonna know, yeah.
I really liked the movie Ip Man. If you've seen it, it's a martial arts movie.
Oh man,
about-
I've all
with
4
them.
of them. Yeah.
So
Yeah,
you're a
but-
person that
but
I would
you
probably like.
You had to have the right Ip Man though. What's his name?
Donnie Yen.
Yeah.
Yeah,
There's
he's
a
the
couple
man.
other ones I just won't watch those.
Yeah, and I know that like a very small percentage of people would watch that movie and enjoy it.
I've watched them a number of times. But what's interesting is that there's a great storyline, especially
Yeah.
the first 2 back in World War II.
But we both like that. That's my point. It is the same way when we talk about like Constantine. There's a lot of movies where I'm like, oh, I know the general public wouldn't probably put this on their watch list. So I would never ask Jordan to watch that. I think she would just watch it and be like, what in the world are you watching?
I'm just so pleased because I never would have guessed Ip Man was going to come out of your mouth.
Yeah, well, and there's a lot like that.
I feel like I'm a movie guy and I've never seen It Man, so
Yeah, no.
yeah, I'm
Yeah.
gonna have to watch that.
Oh, good
But
stuff.
I think similarly, like, so it's not, this isn't like a super niche thing, but Graham and I really love the show Community, and I think you've watched
I've watched it, yeah.
a good amount. There are elements of Community that's not for the general public. Like, there's bizarre stuff.
Yeah,
Like,
they go with these dream sequences.
yeah,
and things
quirky or
sometimes, yeah.
claymation
Yeah.
episodes,
Yeah.
whatever. And so I would always tell Jordan, because it's one of my favorite shows ever. Graham and I talk about it. And Jordan, I would try to like convince her to watch it or say like how good it is. And she would, because she loves me and she's very kind. But without fail, she would come into the room on those very bizarre episodes. And she's like, what are you watching? And I'm like, it's not always like this. And I felt like I had to explain, the whole deal.
So I only watch those things when I'm on the rowing machine.
There you go.
Because I'll never have time. What's interesting is you bring that up, because I heard who's the kind of the lead guy, tall dude in there.
Oh, Jeff.
Yeah, but-
Yeah. what's his real name? I don't know.
It's oh my gosh, he did the soup. It's
yeah.
I'll
Anyhow,
look it up.
I saw
Yeah,
a
thank you.
clip of him
Isaac. What are you doing back there?
talking. Yeah, you
Come
really
on.
should be ahead. Or Jamie is the guy. So he should. So he was talking about the most difficult people on that set, and he complained about Chevy Chase.
yeah, he was a
And
nightmare.
I have
apparently.
heard 4 different stars complain about one director. I was listening to a John Carpenter thing,
Yeah.
and some Invisible Man movie he made a long time ago. Said it was the most horrible guy. he
Yeah,
ever
I've
worked
heard
with.
really bad things about Chevy Chase.
How do you get such a rep? That's a fascinating thing.
Joel McHale.
Joel McHale, yeah.
Yeah. And I think he had his own little, like his own little show at one point too. Mm-hmm. You know how they had the like Tosh or
He
whatever?
did.
It was like
I think
a
it was
late
the
night
Joel
show.
McHale show, and he
Yeah.
had a lot of people from Community on it.
Yeah, yeah, and he would like play videos and comment on them and
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Yep.
Yeah, I feel like he was one of those people that never really like struck a vein outside of Community.
Mm-hmm.
Like he had a little like some random shows and then he had some movies that he was in, but
Yeah.
I feel like he never had the rise to fame that I kind of expected from him. Mm-hmm. More so. Yeah.
Yeah. When you watch him in anything, talk show wise or otherwise, he is that character. He is Jeff Winger in real life. Like,
Is that right?
Well, I don't know in real
Just
life,
played himself.
obviously, but
Kind of sarcastic.
super sarcastic, like really funny. So, but I like his sense of humor. I think it's funny. But,
I like the meta references in Community though, because in real life he's like a semi-attractive dude, but like in Community they'd be like you're kind of like a mediocre Hollywood
Ryan
looking
Seacrest.
guy. Yeah, like, right, yeah, like, and it was just so true. It's like he's like a attractive looking guy, but he's not like that next level Hollywood.
Yeah, the
Chris Hemsworth.
the head of the college seems to like him though.
yeah.
Yeah, the dean.
So
the
funny.
dean was.
Yeah, I could talk about Community. I love that show. But yeah, Graham, why did you ask about the Timothy Chalamet? That's what got us on
I
that
just
whole
I just
whole
see
deal.
him online all the time now, and I think he just won an Oscar recently, so I think he's just like trending on social media and
I don't
whatnot.
know if we have anything pulled up yet on that. No.
Timothy
Isaac,
Chalamet.
what are you
I've
doing?
been sitting on it. He won an Academy Award for Best Actor,
When?
Academy
An
Award.
2025 for
That's
A Complete Unknown. The
Bob Dylan.
yeah,
Okay, yeah. So
Oh,
this
yeah,
was
the
the
Bob
recent one.
Dylan.
This
Yeah.
one just last. Yeah.
And it was his acceptance speech at for that Academy Award that's been like trending, I think. Because I didn't watch it, but there was a bunch of people like giving him a lot of props because I saw like some clickbaity
Yeah.
title that was like, is Timothy Chalamet gonna save like Generation X or whatever the
Z,
next
yeah.
Z? Yeah.
You know where Bob
Right.
Dylan's from?
No.
Hibbing, Minnesota.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
You guys are kindred
Right,
spirits.
we are. He's from the same town that Kevin McHale's from.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Kevin McHale.
Kevin McHale from the Celtics.
I don't really know who Kevin McHale is. I just was thinking the other guy's name was it Joel
I gotta go
McHale?
get Keenan.
So I thought it was like maybe Joel McHale's brother.
Kevin McHale went to the University of Minnesota as well.
Oh,
College
wow.
athlete. He's
Okay.
thought of as one of the finest forwards in NBA history.
Really?
Yeah.
By people from Minnesota.
Fascinating.
No, because I was a Lakers fan growing up when Kevin McHale was around, so I hated the Celtics.
Oh yeah.
So
So
yeah,
Bob Dylan,
disrespected
do you
his
think
gameplay.
that the talent made him, or do you think he's a product of the time and the voice that he was speaking to in the culture at the time? Because it wasn't like that was like the end of Vietnam,
Yeah.
and he was kind of like peace and love, and he was
Well,
bringing
no,
that message.
He got going in the early 60s.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think it's kind of an enigma. It's interesting. I like it, but I don't find a lot of people that do.
Like I've never listened to a Bob Dylan song, I think, all the way through.
Yeah. See?
Just kind of
There
outing
you go.
myself.
Yeah.
Which I'm not saying he's bad. He's like a well-renowned artist, but
Is,
I
yeah.
just was wondering if it's like, like when you watch a show or a movie growing up and you're like, this is the best movie.
He won a Nobel Prize for literature. Did you know that?
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
So you're saying he's objectively
he's
a
all
great
around the
artist.
place,
Yeah.
I think maybe it's just his voice.
I don't
Maybe
know
his
how
voice
good his
just
jump
didn't
shot
do it
is,
for me.
though. But yeah, his voice turns some people off, but I like it. I think you would
It's
say
authentic.
that his voice is on key, though. Just a bad voice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would agree. I think it's the second one. I think it was the time period that he did his thing, that it was the perfect time, and it was like the perfect storm for him to grow to popularity. Because I think, in my opinion, and everything is opinion, like,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to arts and culture and creativity, like, there's no like, oh, this is objectively
But
the
we
best.
still have
or not.
Oscars.
We do, but even then, like, you could say that there's a lot of times the movies that win awards are not really my cup of tea.
No, I don't
You
know
know,
any of the movies.
it's
yeah.
not. I wouldn't go to like the Academy Award winner movies to be like, what am I
So
going to watch?
It Man
next?
wasn't winning a
Probably
bunch
not.
of awards.
Should.
It also just one example, but
Do you
I
also
think-
go to Comic Con? Just out of curiosity.
Ip Man has nothing to do. Ip Man is the real deal. You need to check that
I'll
out.
Oh.
Standing up to the oppressive Japanese back in the 30s.
I think personally that Bob Dylan is looked back on. People romanticize the idea of Bob Dylan, and I think if you objectively look at his songs and stuff, I think people overhype Bob Dylan, in my opinion. That's
Yeah.
maybe a hot take. I don't know.
Yeah.
He has interesting songs. One thing about his songs you rarely hear is a chorus. He just strings lots of words together.
Do you have a personal favorite that I should listen to in the car later?
I enjoy the Blood on the Tracks album.
Wow.
So if you went to Tangled
Blood
Up
on
in
the
Blue or
Tracks.
Shelter from the Storm, those are two of my faves.
What was the first one you said?
Tangled Up in Blue is a song. It's the first song on Blood on the Tracks.
Okay.
And then Shelter from the Storm is on the B side, which we used to have back in the day.
Wow. Is that when you flipped it over?
You had to flip your record over.
Wow. That's nuts.
So that's a good one. But then you go all the way back to all of his early stuff. All good things. You'd probably recognize a lot of the songs if you heard them. Yeah. A lot of them were covered as well.
Yeah.
Jimi Hendrix covered.
All
Really?
on the
All on the
Watchtower.
Watchtower, yeah.
That's how you know you're a good poet if people are covering your songs.
Yeah,
Like,
I'd give him. I'd
um,
give him that. I think that he's a better poet than like musician.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of who's like that in our culture today, who writes a lot of songs, but maybe they're not the one who performs them.
At one point, I think it was Rolling Stone magazine lifted like the top 100 guitar players, and they put him in there.
Really?
That was fascinating.
Maybe he
That's
is.
a
I
feat.
have no idea.
He's just,
Yeah.
mostly. A big thing was at the, what was it, in Connecticut? This folk festival. And that was in like 69, I think. He pulled out the electric guitar, and he really teed off a lot of people because they didn't like
They
that
like
he
his
was
folk
leaving
groups.
that.
Yeah. It's like Mumford and Sons when they went to electric music. People were really upset because they'd fallen in love
I
with.
haven't even followed their arc. I didn't know they did that.
Yeah, they had
I'm
like.
used to banjo.
Well,
Mumford
that's
and
right,
Sons.
and they stopped making. They moved on to different types of music, and people were like they'd fallen in love with what they kind of represented and stood for, and then when they changed, people were.
You
No.
changed, man.
That's right. That's right.
Now, on the other hand, you could put a lot of songs in a lineup, and I could not identify a Taylor Swift song for you.
Sure.
Yeah. So I'm falling short there.
Yep.
You're missing out big time.
Graham's a Swiftie.
Yeah.
Not really.
I understand now you wouldn't have wanted to have gone out with her because she was then write a scathing song about you.
Right.
Yeah.
But it seems like Travis Kelce has like been the it man
So far has been the it
for
man.
Taylor Swift.
This is the kind of content you don't get on other podcast.
Other
This is
Christian
what the people want.
No, you probably
I have a question for you guys. You
Bob
want to go
Dylan,
deeper?
however, you know, Bob Dylan was a good full on Christian. He had like 3
No way.
Christian albums. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
What happened?
Slow Train Coming. Saved was one of the albums called
Really?
Saved. Yeah, and then I can't remember the other one, but I have all 3 of them there. He would still claim to be. He kind of
Really?
went through a little bit of a Jewish stint, but then he did that. But you wouldn't have known it. He actually played harmonica on a Keith Green song.
Okay.
Yeah. So they
I'm
used to
beginning,
hang out.
as I criticized Bob Dylan, realizing I don't know much about Bob Dylan. So maybe I should be slower to do that. Well, I wouldn't have.
I'm sorry, I
wouldn't have
interrupted
guessed
you.
No, I was going to say, do you want to go into a deeper question or no? Because no.
What,
Okay.
what do you have something?
No, I was going to say with the topic of art and
Yeah.
beauty,
Yeah.
do you feel like art and beauty like almost makes a case for God? The fact that like human beings, like we have this desire for art and beauty and these things that we kind of like ascend ourselves to.
I have a comment that was very interesting on that.
yeah.
Can I?
Yeah,
So
please do.
I was listening to a talk with N.T. Wright. You guys know N.T. Wright?
Yeah.
I've listened to a lot of him.
Was it the one, the conference that he was recently at with Tim Mackey?
Did you send that to me? Somebody sent that to me.
I didn't
No, Tom did. Tom sent me. Yeah, Mackey and Stanton.
Yeah,
and,
yeah. Is it Tyler Stanton?
Tyler
Yeah.
Stanton. A lot of guys that sometimes I want to. We talked a little bit about that. But what was interesting is a lot of hair product and a lot of people. As you can see, I also lose a lot of hair
They're kind of
product.
almost hipstery, too.
Almost too much for
Yeah.
me.
Tyler Stanton's a little
yeah.
hipstery.
Yeah, and Mark Comer.
Yeah.
that
he's
kind of crew.
He's a gentle soul.
The funny thing is, I feel like Tyler's.
Snowflakes.
I feel like Tyler Staton makes John Mark Comer like he's like the Fight Club version of John Mark Comer. You know what I mean?
That's one tender Fight Club.
Yeah, it really is.
But what was happening? I think N.T. Wright went off on talking about similar to what you're talking about how all creation kind of comes back. Because sometimes we just look at humanity and we don't blend. It's like when he didn't talk about this, but like in Revelation, not Revelation, but Romans, that all creation groans for things to be made right again. And so it was interesting because he even talked about animals, how connections that we have with them. Apparently, the night before, Stanton was talking about some long story about his dog, and then he said afterwards he never realized that he had this cosmic connection with his dog after N.T. Wright talked about that. So I don't make enough of the connection that you're talking about with those things that are outside of humanity. But what I was thinking about after that, so we have 2 old chocolate labs that live next door, and I find nothing but joy when they come over, Tucker and Lucy.
Yeah.
And I get to hang out with them. I sit down in the driveway, and they snort all over me, and then they try to dig out the garbage in our garage. But
You're a big
that's-
dog lover.
But that's good. But another thing that what was I going to say about
Was it something
that?
Tim Wright said?
Oh, well,
Or-
no. Tim Keller used to talk a lot about the arts and things. I've never, enlighten me. Talk to me about that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, every Sunday we worship God to music.
Yeah.
And I think that there's kind of this element of good poetry, good song, that gets us into this place of feeling almost like we're in a transcendent state. But it can also be a dangerous thing as well, because sometimes you'll hear people say, I had a spiritual experience at like I don't know, some kind of fill in the blank band concert, and they're just like, I had a spiritual experience, and you don't know if there's any drugs involved with that as well. But it seems like our hearts gravitate towards that transcendent experience, and many people fill it in with literature and movies and music, especially, I think is a huge one. But I think that really points to the power of those things, but also maybe our hearts gravitating towards something, the most beautiful thing, which is God.
Yeah.
So I think good beauty directs our eyes upwards towards God, who is the most beautiful. If that makes
Well, I
sense.
think so. My opinion of it is kind of so. I think of in Michael Heiser's book, the what was it, The Unseen Realm?
Unseen Realm, yeah.
He talks a lot about like the word imager, like that we're image bearers of God. That's what we're made in His image is, and so there's like a lot of the way we are bears the image of the one who created us and sent us. And then there's obviously sin that doesn't represent Him, that's into play. But understanding that, and then you mix that with like a lot of what we've learned about like the demonic and things, that both our flesh and the enemy, there's no creativity apart from God. And so all we do is either mimic as a form of worship, or we mimic as a form of trying to glory steal. And so I think that naturally, to answer your question, I believe, yes, there is something in us that like appreciates and worships the creativity and beauty that God creates and is instilled into the world. But then the dangerous part is that we often fall into like almost the same tendencies as Satan, which was like, I want that glory for myself, so I'm gonna do what God did myself to gain my own glory. And so I don't believe that like musicians and actors and artists and all these things are doing these creations to have people's admiration, everything point towards God.
No.
I think they're doing it to have their admiration point towards them.
Right.
And that's the like glory stealing that we see. That's really the original sin, you know, and everything boils down to that, which is just really fascinating.
So how do you because I was reading a book. I only got halfway through it one time. It was called The Wind in the Wheat, but it was fiction, and it showed this one guy and his elevation in the Christian music scene, and so in the question is, how do you, because they're elevated.
Oh yeah, for sure.
These artists, then yet you see a lot of them doing this deconstructing their faith thing. Does the deconstruction? So here's a cart and a horse question. Does the deconstruction thing come because of the elevation, or was it never really there?
Right.
When they were elevated, and then how should there be a what is it, CMA? No, what's the Christian thing called?
Oh yeah, like the Dove Awards that
well,
they
those
have.
are the awards, but
Yeah.
should there be an album chart for Christian music?
Right.
Oh, sure.
Probably not, but it's never not going to be there.
No, 'cause it's
You know.
commercial, right? It all comes down to the Benjamins.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. 100%. And it slowly gets perverted, unfortunately. And you kind of, it's a challenging dynamic because of that, because of the Benjamins, more Christian music is made now than ever. And there's probably more opportunity in that space now than ever was before. And so there's like a lot of cool new Christian music out there and new genres. And I think there's a lot of people that have a great heart as they go into it. But at the same time, it's a very dangerous thing because whenever you're elevated purely out of a competency in a spiritual realm, it's so easy to deceive others and yourself into thinking, oh, this is who I am. This is what I'm all about. And this past Sunday in Discovery Point group, we kind of talked about the idea of what Jesus says, you'll see wolves in sheep's clothing. And from the beginning of time, even in Jesus's day, there were a lot of people who used religion and the temple and spirituality for their own selfish ambition and for their own purposes and manipulated others through it. And I think that's the tricky thing is you just it's really hard sometimes to know somebody else's heart. And so just a classic example, I'm sure he's a great guy, but I don't know Brandon Lake personally, but he's probably the most popular worship artist out there right now, and my daughters love listening to his songs and everything like that. but I don't know if he's who he says he is. He seems to probably be that way because he's got enough people in his life, but it's challenging to know if these people are just kind of creating something that they know is going to be consumed and bought and enjoyed, and what their motivations are behind it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you said it like we can't know the motivations of the heart, because ultimately it like happened with the disciples. So you had like think of like Peter towards the end of his ministry, where people are running out into the street just trying to get into his shadow so they can be healed.
Right.
You can imagine he had very similar like notoriety and fame, quote unquote fame. But we would say, well, he didn't do anything wrong to earn that. He was being obedient to what God was calling him to do. So I think there's some that's like out of the control of the person.
Yeah.
But you've said it before, Kurt, that like we're not made to carry that weight of being worshiped. And so whether they intended it or not, Christian music artists that are popular, like a Phil Wickham, a Brandon Lake, Elevation Worship, they are being worshiped by people, whether that was their intention or not. And it's not healthy. It's very, very dangerous.
So,
I don't envy them for that.
Mm-hmm.
So a good response to that we find with Paul and Barnabas, right? I don't know if it's in Derby, where they were, where the guys...
Is this the prescriptive response, do you think?
One is Zeus, one is, was it Apollos?
Yeah.
And they tore their clothing
right.
and said, we're not this. But it almost seems like it should be prescriptive, shouldn't it? If you're looking down, and
especially if you're being called a god,
you're leading someone astray because they're looking at you and elevating you to a wrong place. Yeah, it's a good question.
And there are some that have. So I remember watching an interview with a guy who was like, I don't remember his name, but he was like very high up in the Christian music scene, and he started to see that was the case, and he tore it all down. He stopped, like just cold turkey, just stopped like writing music, stopped touring, just shut the whole thing down, because he said that he could see it wasn't good for him, it wasn't good for his family, and that people were doing what we were just talking about. And he was very like humble about not condemning others, because they asked him, they're like, well, what do you think about other people doing it? And he said, everyone just has to be obedient to what they feel the Spirit's calling them to. But he said he was certain that the Holy Spirit wanted him to cease doing it.
Wow.
So if you took that to other genres, then what if people started, when Keenan's up there preaching, they started chanting Graham, because
kind of like a David Saul situation.
Yes, so,
Be like, no,
so they want to hear you.
First of all, I would just, I'd probably wake up and my wife would be like, Graham, it's 7:30. You're waiting for work. Come on. Oh, what? No, not again. I thought it happened. No.
But that's a good question. So I was reading a thing this morning that is interesting. I was thinking about it, and it talked about abandonment, and this is kind of a little bit what we're talking about. And the fellow pointed out, it might have been an Oswald Chambers thing that somebody sent, and it talked about we can't practice abandonment for ourselves for what we're going to get, and I thought, well, that was interesting. What's my motive if I'm abandoning myself, for Jesus? And could I have other motives? Because when you abandon yourself, you're letting everything go. And then I just went and I just thought about Jesus when he says, "If you want to be my disciple," he says, "Pick up your cross and you have to lose your life for my sake."
Right.
And so that always has to be first and foremost our reasoning for what we do. And it's we just all the time need to be thinking about what our motives are and let him expose those to us, because you could really go off the deep end, and that's why we find these celebrity pastors having problems.
Yeah. When you say abandoning, it kind of has like a negative connotation, at least like when you hear the word abandon, but that's like a good,
yes,
used in a good way.
Abandoning your puppy
But
out
like,
of the corner. Yeah.
would you say that like abandonment is just letting go of anything that's getting in the way of you and Jesus, or things that are distracting?
You might mix surrender
or-
in with that sort of idea.
Like you can't surrender unless you have an abandonment.
It's the abandonment of self. Because we're supposed to die to ourselves, right? So the least we could do is abandon it.
Yeah. So you're letting it go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, which we can see almost the manipulation of that, where it's like abandoning self doesn't necessarily. It's like the C.S. Lewis quote, right? Like humility is not thinking less about yourself, but it's thinking about yourself less.
Yeah.
Like I'd kind of akin that to abandonment. That abandonment isn't abandoning your pride and humiliating yourself on purpose, because that could be done with horrible motives. It's actually thinking less about what you get out of it, period, which would just leave you open to do whatever God wants in that situation, which might not be like, I think about like, you could walk around in sackcloth and ashes if that's what the Holy Spirit was prompting you to mourn in your heart, or you could walk around in sackcloth and ashes to make everybody look at how like humble you are, or whatever. And obviously that's not an example that matches our culture, but like the two people could be doing the exact same thing, and one is not abandoned for God. They're absolutely wrapped up in their own selfishness and selfish motives, and the other could be. So it's like Jesus ate and he walked around fully clothed and he had all of his needs met in one way, but yet he was fully abandoned to the will of the Holy Spirit.
You brought up an interesting point. We should have confession time about when we have portrayed false humility.
Yeah.
Humility flexes.
Yeah, I think it's easy to do. I think, well, one thing sometimes I
think we're out of time, actually.
Yeah. I notice this about myself if I'm not careful, is I can put my my longing for approval in the hands of people and not put it in God's hands as just a permanent state that I get to rest in of, I'm approved of because God loves me, and Jesus proved it through his life and his death on the cross that he loves me, and now that's just who I am. I'm approved, But I notice that's really easy to say, but then there's certain circumstances where I put myself in what could be perceived as by others or in myself as a performative realm, like even being on a podcast that's filmed or being on a stage and giving a talk or something like that. And I've noticed, even if I feel like I did an okay job in whatever area that was in, that I sometimes, if I like see my wife afterwards, I might say something negative about, say, a sermon that I gave right away, almost in a sense of trying to like hit myself before I could possibly be criticized or hit. Yeah. And then hopefully even maybe to be like, no, that was good, and it's a total false humility out of a place of one, approval seeking, and then two, trying to like reject myself before I could even be rejected or criticized, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
I used to do that a lot more. Thankfully, now that I feel like I'm more anchored in Jesus, I don't do that as much. But
with the answer in all this is kind of, you must think of yourself less.
Yeah.
Let's just
you just have
set
to
our minds on things above and
know where you're standing, But going back to the whole active humility thing, Paul was fairly famous probably in the early church after a certain point of planting so many churches and writing his letters. And I think he was famous and infamous depending on who you were talking to, because it seemed like a lot of people didn't like Paul. Even people who were, converts in some of his churches, they were like, that Paul guy, he's a little too intense sometimes. But
intense, or they say he acts like a big man in his letters, but when he comes, he's a wimp.
Yeah, he's all timid and But I love that Paul, and I don't think it's false humility when he does this. He starts off his letters usually by saying, I'm a slave and a servant of Christ Jesus, before he gets into saying I'm an apostle or anything like that. And he knows that he has authority in the church's eyes. I mean, that's why he wrote that letter That's why they preserve the letter. He knows that he has that apostolic authority, but he never forgets that he's like, I'm the chief of sinners,
Yep.
and I'm a slave of Jesus at the end of the day. I'm doing this in service to him and not so I can garner your praise or anything like that. And I think in one of the letters he even goes, I think it might be in Galatians, he says, if I was trying to get man's approval, I would not be doing what I'm doing right now. He's like, this is not a good occupation to jump into if you're trying to get man's approval.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think we've talked about it on the podcast actually before that, like I had to learn a lot about that with worship. And I felt like the pendulum swung a bit where obviously, I think that puts you in a position like when you're leading worship, it's a very, very tangible, it's much like speaking.
Right.
If you're like giving the message or whatever, you're put in a position where people give you a lot of feedback,
Right.
and can like lift you up and elevate you. And so it brings the opportunity. And I think naturally we do want people's approval. I don't know. And I don't even know if that's necessarily worth the time to wrestle with and like fight against, trying to be like, I don't want people's approval. I don't want people's approval.
Right.
Really, if you think less about yourself, not think less of yourself, but think about yourself less, it doesn't matter. And that's like the sweet spot to get to is like, it doesn't matter if people approve me or not. But with worship, the lesson I had to learn was when I first started, for a long, long time, because I'm obviously wrestling with that in my heart and the humility and all of that in my heart. And so when people would give you like really nice feedback or whatever, because oftentimes in church, like that's what they're going to do. They're just, whether you did a
Sure.
good job or you didn't do a good job, they're very encouraging
They're gonna
people
pat you
for the
on the
most
back,
part.
yeah.
And so I remember I would really find myself in an awkward position where people would, say nice things, and you're trying to do like well, it's not about me. Like it's all for God's glory, which is
Right.
true. It is all for God's glory, obviously. But you do this weird dance, and it always felt inauthentic. And I think I wrestled with that for a long time where I'm like, well, it's just exhausting trying to like, fight it. And it feels inauthentic, and it's definitely false humility because I do care about whether they thought I did a good job or whatever.
Yeah.
And then I think as you just grow in your, maybe like your security, like you said, Graham, of like your security of who you are in Jesus, I think, not that I do it perfectly, but I think I came to like be okay with if somebody says something kind to just say thank you, to be like, oh, thanks, that's really kind. Like I appreciate the encouragement. And that is so freeing because it's like, if I don't do a good job, that's okay too. And that's fine. And if someone had constructive criticism, it's like, yeah, okay, thank you so much for like that. That's great. But it's actually quite a bondage to be a slave to that. So you got to move out of the place where it's like, oh, it just doesn't matter. But it's almost like a practice. Mm-hmm. You have to like be very intentional to practice it, and knowing that like you can't really wrestle it completely. It's just gonna happen.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes any sense.
I think that makes sense. I think it's also important to note that God does kind of like platform certain individuals, and you see that in the Bible. And I think we're all responsible for our own hearts, but you can't necessarily be responsible for everybody else's heart as well. Like all you can do is do your best to remind people that you're just a vessel, that you're just a human being like anybody else, and that like how they look at that, how they view you is kind of, in a sense, like on them to a degree, right? But I also just think of like even Jesus, his Paul and Barnabas moment to me was when he, in John, I think it's John chapter 6, he multiplies the fish and the loaves for the people. And then they start to follow him for the wrong reasons. Like they almost turn Jesus in that moment into a false god of who they want the king of Israel to be. And they're like, well, Moses, when when the Israelites were in the wilderness, God brought manna down from heaven, and then Jesus is like, look, you guys are following me right now because I multiplied the loaves, but he's like, I'm the bread of life. I'm a greater manna. And if you can't eat from my flesh and drink from my blood, then have no part in me.
Yeah.
And so he kind of gives them like this intense crossroad moment and says a bunch of people leave and they don't want to follow him anymore, except for probably like the 12, I think, is seemingly all that's left
Where can
after
we go?
that.
You have the words of life.
Exactly. So I think it's he understands their motives, and I think is what good leaders do is they remind people of the main thing. And if they're starting to feel like, I think this is becoming a show and I'm enabling it, then we have to take ownership for that.
Yep.
For sure. If we're trying to like get into the entertainment business or give people something that's not what God would give them, that's like that lasting bread that Jesus has, then I think that's a direction change that we have to make.
So that's an interesting balance because if we looked at our situation here, could you put together so slick a performance that it starts to overshadow the message?
I think you definitely could.
And do
I feel like I've seen that happen.
Do we
yeah,
need to
for sure.
recognize that and then tone down the performance? I mean, this is...
Yeah, we'd have this conversation all the time. Yeah,
Or do you like talk with a lisp when that happens?
I don't know. I don't know what you... or do all of a sudden, as let's say the music is like, stupendous and the worship and everything. And
Right.
so now the preacher comes up and now he tries to just emphasize and be charismatic.
Right.
Because you're all trying to
Right.
match this excellence that's
yeah, I
out
think
there.
that's a bad situation. That's a dangerous place to be. I think a better place is that everyone who's involved would just really take on the ownership of what the Holy Spirit has them doing in that moment. So if you're the worship team, you are there to do what you are serving, because we get out of that place like a pastor giving the message, the worship team, person doing the Genmo, all those things. You are serving the church. You're serving, and so ultimately, your job is to serve the people that are there. And so if your objective is to give them knowledge that would hopefully, or encouragement or whatever, to lead them into closer intimacy with Jesus, then I'd say they're doing it's a job well done. But if what they're doing is purposefully trying to get their affection and attention drawn on themselves, then it's not a job well done. And both could be it's like a knife's edge of what the motivation there is. And so almost you could, from the outside looking in, you could see the exact same thing happen from the platform, and one could be with motives that are non-pleasing to the Lord, and one could be with motives that are pleasing to the Lord. And so it's very difficult. I think it's our job, if we're on the inside being part of it and making those decisions, we have to be so sold out for Jesus, so that Holy Spirit, have your way, do your thing, and move out of the way.
So if you looked at your time as leading worship, how would you contrast your approach to leading worship now compared to, say, 10 years ago?
Oh, yeah. I mean, even just like, I look back and my mind was you don't know what you don't know. I'll say that too. I definitely have more empathy and grace for people because I've experienced my shortcomings, which is just like, I don't know that I really even had the intentionality back then to get out of my own head and be able to serve people in worship. It was me performing a task that I recognize as helpful. And I did it with like good intentions, probably at the time. Like, they need someone to lead worship. I'm happy to do it. I enjoy doing it. And this is a helpful piece, but I didn't look at it as like a pastoral moment. I didn't look at it as serving the people that were there, leading them prayerfully into a place of refocusing their attention to Jesus. Because we've talked about that too, like singing and all that, that's praise. We can praise Jesus, but you can praise Jesus without any worship happening in your heart. And so it's leading them to a place of like channeling their affection and their attention into a place of gratitude and thanksgiving of who Jesus is. And that can be done, but it takes an incredible intentionality. And I think if I look back at the ways that I had done it, the things that I would focus on were things that were very much performance oriented than pastoral oriented. And so it was things about making sure I didn't, we used to have and Isaac, maybe you remember this on the team. We used to have a big mantra about like a purpose. And I still believe this is partly true, but a big purpose of the tech and worship team is to remove distractions. And so you become as distraction free as possible so that we don't interrupt people coming face to face with Jesus. And so I would look at and justify everything in my mind as that. So I'd say like, well, I don't want to sing off key because if I sing off key, that's distracting and it'll pull people out of worship. I don't want to forget the lyrics because if I forget the lyrics, it'll be distracting. I don't want to be bad because that would be distracting.
Right.
So I felt like I had good motives, but at the root of that, I was always one microscopic like percent from switching from that to, well, I want to do all those things because I want to sound good and I want people to think that I'm really good at this.
Right.
And I would oscillate almost like have like an internal fight in my own mind because I'd oscillate so rapidly between both of those things.
Yeah.
And you just wrestle with it like crazy. And the freedom of just being able to be like, it's not important. Like I can be obedient with what God's asking me to do in this moment and what the church is asking me to do in this moment. And it is what it is. And who am I? I could never, even if I wanted to, detract what God's going to do, you know? And so, I think I'm still learning it, but it's challenging. I think all of us have that burden.
Yeah.
For sure. What about you, Kurt?
I don't lead worship anymore.
No, but you have a position of people's attention. Like when you ask the question, like what's a false humility?
Yeah.
And I know we are getting towards the end, but
Yeah.
maybe we can end on this. Like what's a Kurt struggle with humility?
I want just a simple example might be, so like doing a message might be, so if I'm preparing the week before and I think of something that I find funny and so I'll try to write that in. I find that if I won't even talk about the humor quotient, but just the effectiveness of it is so far less than anything that just comes off the cuff. To the point where frequently if I'm kind of going over my later iterations of looking at it, I'll remove it. I'll say, no, that was for me.
Yep.
I was trying to get something.
Yeah.
So yeah, I find that kind of thing happens a lot.
Yep.
Because it's just not, you're almost embarrassed in front of Jesus. Oh yeah,
Sure.
I was trying to
Yeah,
take a little bit of this.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. The words that keep coming back, the verse, and I don't know, maybe you guys can help me. The verse that keeps like going like on a reel through my mind all the time lately is now I just forgot it. Is like you praise me with your mouths, but your hearts are far from me.
Yeah.
Right.
And I feel like I've just been thinking about that all the time where, not that my heart's far from him, but like, is my heart on par with the way that I talk about him?
Right.
And so if I'm going to praise him with my mouth, is my heart in step with that?
That's the biggest trap of the Christian life.
It's so hard.
It's
It's
letting
yeah.
your mouth run ahead of your heart.
Yep. And so it's like, oh man, that's something that I want to keep. And it's hard because it's convicting, but I want that on my mind all the time to think, okay. Because I'm in a position, a lot of people's mouths don't honor him with their mouth either. And so
Yeah.
they got to do that too.
True.
But we're in a position where, our day to day is like honoring him with our mouth.
Yeah.
So I want my heart to be in step. And so I just kind of
Yeah.
Make sure it's
So we'd like our emailers to tell us, where are we falling short?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Give us a
Let
slice
know.
of humble pie.
Are we ready to roll out of here?
When
think
you're ready.
so.
Excellent. Well, thanks for joining us today. That was it was a good one, and I recommend taking a listen to Blood on the Tracks.
Oh,
Get your bob on. It's an acoustic album that came out in '74, maybe. But anyhow, it's good to be with you all. Look forward to being with you soon. And email us again if you have any questions or comments, anything you'd like us to cover. God bless you.